Welcome all to our TEDx Archivorum fourth session. Today we will have four very exciting speakers. Emilio Sempris will take us through the net zero emissions to climate stabilization. What can we do in the remaining of our lifetime? Sean will explain the way his company, With Straws, works, why it is highly effective, and what the upcoming plastic ban in Europe means for us all. Chances will tell us how we are at the tipping point when it comes to thawing of Arctic permafrost, as well as elucidating the often unconsidered biodiversity loss in the wild. Rachel, finally, will be talking about the role of documentaries in fighting climate change, focusing on his recent production of Sea of Shadows. Hear about Richard's amazing stories, filming all around the world and working with Leonardo DiCaprio and Jane Goodall. I welcome all our four speakers, and I hope TEDx Archivorum will give to all of you once more the opportunity to reflect on how, through individual and collective initiative, we can reverse the dreadful effects of climate change. Please join me in welcoming Emilio.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January edition of TEDx Archivorum. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Agatha, and I'm delighted to be hosting our first session today with Emilio Sempris, the former Minister of Environment of the Republic of Panama. Having served as Director General of the Water Center for the Humid Tropics of Latin America and the Caribbean for over 10 years, Emilio has extensive experience in the fields of international cooperation, climate change, and sustainability. He is also the co-founder of the startup Brundtland School of Prosperity and Governance. Decorated with the Manuel Amador Guerrero Order Grand Cross and awarded by NASA for his regional visualization and monitoring system work, we are incredibly lucky to have him with us today. So now over to you, Emilio. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agatha. Good morning. Thank you very much for this great opportunity. After reflecting and discussing with colleagues, friends, people heavily involved in climate change, I came up with this proposal that we all have to have, same way we have our New Year's resolution, we have to have also our new decade resolution, what we're going to commit to do for the next 10 years so that we meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Our climate, as you are aware, we are going through a very difficult crisis, and it will take a concerted effort from all parties involved in the UNFCCC and also everybody, every human being on Earth to stabilize our climate. So I came up with these 10 resolutions that I will fully commit for the next 10 years. And I hope that I'm able to motivate you to come up also with your 10 resolutions so that we all together stabilize our climate and avoid catastrophic events. So the first resolution that I committed to is to advocate to go from climate neutrality to climate stability. As you may be aware, it's taken so long for all parties, all countries to agree on first the UNFCCC, then the Kyoto Protocol, and ultimately, and lastly, the Paris Agreement. However, the agreement is not enough to reach the consensus on the ultimate objective of the convention, that is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that prevents dangerous human impacts. So here, the big issue that we have is that it is taking us so long. From Rio to Kyoto, it took us about 5 years. But then from Kyoto to Paris, it took us almost 13 years. We had nearly 4 years of delay because of the US government that rejected the Paris Agreement. So now we are very hopeful that starting January the 20th, under the leadership of Joe Biden and his special envoy, John Kerry, whom I know and I can attest of his capabilities to address climate change, we hope to reinvigorate the political efforts to address climate change. The issue that we're facing here is that we need to make sure that our climate system doesn't surpass 1.5 degrees. In Paris, we as developing countries made a strong case to go after 1 degree, but the agreement at the end established 2 degrees. I hope that we get to 1.5 degrees. We need to keep to that 1.5 degrees, and hopefully by 2030, we agree on a pathway to take us hopefully back to zero, human-induced change, so that we stabilize our greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So the second commitment that I've made is that we need to advance predictive science and technology to address extreme weather events. The beginning of the recent record, 1840, 1850, we've had nearly 11,000 storms, including tropical storms, hurricanes or typhoons, depending on the region of the planet that you live in. And those have caused so much pain, particularly in developing countries and in tropical regions. So I believe that we have the tools now to do a better job, not only predicting the extreme weather events, but also communicating it to our governments, to civil societies, to our communities, so that we reduce human losses. And eventually we are capable also to address the material losses that we are facing with when encounter this type of event. So we need to commit to advanced science, to advanced communications, to work with governments, to work with the private sector, to work with communities, municipalities, to address these effects. So the third commitment is to ban human-induced forest fire. This map I put together last year as part of a competition on visualization. And what you can see here is the world divided into subnational regions, municipalities mostly, and prefectures, depending on where you live in the planet. You can easily see that Central African countries have a lot of forest fires. Also, you could see that the same in the Eastern Europe, South America, of course, Australia, as you can see in the map, and Australia, Brazil, they have made it to the news for the pandemics heavily because of the increased forest fires. So we need to address this issue. We need to send a strong message to international cooperation, to the private sector, so that we avoid forest fires that make us lose this precious biodiversity, impoverishes our soils, and endanger our capacity to generate the food that we most need in developing countries. The fourth commitment is to relocate climate refugees due to sea level rise. And this is a very difficult one. This visualization, this group of bubbles feature the countries, the small ones, the countries with sea level rise issues. And we're talking here about nearly 60 million people in the small island developing state. What I've been trying to configure here is a concept whereby geopolitically and historically interested developed countries put in place a framework so that we can start discussing the climate refugees that we are actually facing in Panama. Back in 1997, we started a study on our potential climate sea level rise refugees. And we identified an indigenous community with over 30,000 indigenous people. It took us nearly 20 years to start the project. In 2017, we launched the project to relocate those local communities from inland territories to the mainland in Panama. It took us 20 years, so this is a very lengthy process, very painful, because it touches the very cultural aspects of them losing entitlement or empowerment over the lands because of climate change, the cultural adaptation that they have to face so that they can start their new lives. So far, we have moved actually the first 300 families to mainland. Also, it took a lot of convincing because as an indigenous community, the first reaction is that you want to displace them because you want their lands. But then through an iterative process and a lot of conversation with the scientific community, we were able to engage in a process through which they move inland and now they are safe. So this is a very successful process. The same could happen with the countries in yellow, France, for instance, with climate refugees from the island states that they are mostly related with historically or geopolitically. This is a very delicate issue. So this is something that we as a whole need to commit so that we don't leave anybody behind. Fast track, RED Plus, as you may be aware, RED Plus is the reduction of emission from deforestation and forest degradation. This is nearly 20% of the solution. In the previous talks, I remember in December, you had a speaker discussing about sustainable husbandry. We strongly believe that if tropical developing countries have access to the resources, they will not only empower themselves to have better livelihoods, but they will also be able to promote economic growth and prosperity that would serve all nations of the planet. This is 20% of the problem. So, and it's the low-hanging fruit, still the low-hanging fruits in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So what I believe is that with the commitment under the convention, the private sector involvement through ESG and also governmental resources, we could leverage a ton of opportunity here. For instance, in Panama, we have what we call the Alliance for the Million Hectares. Basically, we passed a law in 2017, an incentive law, so that investors could mobilize resources with a very accommodating package, so that they engage in forest conservation, forest restoration projects that would bring about carbon benefits and also adaptation, climate change. And basically, we are forecasting that in the next 10 years, we are going to be able to contribute about $6 billion to Panama's GDP because of only forest management. So this is a great opportunity for the private sector. Being Panama a small country, I strongly believe that if we scale up this solution with tax incentives, and all other type of incentive, countries will be able to do a lot better in terms of restoring the forest cover, and at the end, in the context of the United Nations Climate Change Convention, be able to comply with the commitments of greenhouse gas emission reduction. The sixth proposed resolution is to decentralize climate change. Most of the negotiations, most of the dealings has been with national governments, but we are now at a point where cities are popping out all over developing countries. You see the massive growth in China, and eventually that same growth is going to hit Latin America. We're going through the pandemics, but we believe that after the pandemic, there's going to be a massive injection of financial resources, and those resources will have to interact with the cities, with the urban areas. Globally, probably nearly 2% of the land is allocated for human settlements, particularly cities. So we strongly believe that cities are going to play a very strong role in combating climate change, and the role is going to be more effective than doing it from the national or decentralized bureaucratic systems. So we have to be very supportive of all the mayors of cities, all the mayors of municipalities interested in addressing climate change to projects and programs. So number 7, to adopt a climate resilient building code. I remember in 2018, I went to Busan in Korea with my wife, and we made a stop in Seoul before getting to Busan. And I remember at the front desk, they asked me where I was going, and I told them tomorrow I'm going to Busan, and they told me that there was a typhoon in Busan that just passed 24 hours ago. And I remember clearly telling my wife, you know, we come from Panama, we come from Central America, where you see a lot of hurricanes, and now we go to Busan, and we're going to be facing a hurricane. So since I wasn't aware of the physical infrastructure of Busan, I didn't even know if I had to cancel the meeting. But I decided to go. So we went to Busan, and I was really surprised that about 36 hours after the hurricane passed, there were some damages, but business was open. The city infrastructure was well preserved. Everything was operating business as usual. And there were a few small houses in the rural area of Busan that were a bit impacted, but nothing like what happened in Central America, or what happens in the Philippines or the Southeast countries when a typhoon hits them. So that made me realize that we need to do a lot in terms of reinvesting in strengthening our infrastructure to address climate-related or weather-related extreme events. Promote green chemistry. I think this is the heart at the individual level. We can make individual decisions whether to buy a product or not, and and we see more and more how green products are becoming mainstream. This is just one simple example how some components from a plant-based solution is created to preserve natural products so they can stay longer on shelf. So this is a product called Appeal. Basically, it is supposed to replace the resin that you see in apples and products like avocados that travel a long distance. Because it's natural based, it preserves a lot better the products that it uses. So here, what I see is a revolution where we as society take decisions to promote those investments, those companies interested in doing not only good, but also doing the best they can in terms of the use of their chemistry knowledge. We have as I will point out later on in the presentation, we are at a stage where the new generation is coming in, and they're coming in with a new chip, and we as decision makers in the private sector, governments, local communities, we need to accommodate them so that we live in a greener place. We need to close the sustainable investment gap. Sustainable finance is trending nowadays. Everybody's talking about sustainable finance, the ESGs and everything, but there is a big gap. The last number that I had access to argue that there were about $14 trillion on their some sort of sustainability management. So those assets, and in my opinion, are under a very loose definition of sustainability. Most of those assets are just compliant with reporting and a little bit of verification. Things are going to become a lot stringent now. I really hope that corporations, particularly in the US, Canada, and Asia and Australia, can catch up with Europe, that is taking the leadership in promoting ESG as a solution to transform the way we grow on Earth. Here, from the intergovernmental standpoint, we have an issue to face, and we still don't know how it's going to be addressed. We have the Green Climate Fund, we have the GCF, the Global Environmental Facility, and other financial mechanisms under the UNFCCC. Those financial mechanisms were supposed to receive nearly $100 billion a year to invest in climate change projects, mostly mitigation projects in developing countries. As of today, probably they have only received at least the GCF have received nearly $10 billion. So we went from a commitment of $100 billion a year until 2020 to only receive $10 billion so far. So I'm not sure whether governments, developed country governments, have sent the signal that now they're going to do their investment through the ESG schemes and direct support the private companies, or they're going to renew their commitments under the new Biden administration. So that's something that we need to pay a close attention at, and I will be advocating really hard for making sure that those resources are fully committed and deployed, particularly in developing countries. So, and finally, education on sustainability and climate change. If you are seeing this presentation and you are born before 2005, probably you never took a class related to climate change or sustainability in high school, not even to mention the university. About 6% of the human population has gone through formal education at the university level. So there is a big gap. The new generation, those born from 2005 and on, are starting to ask us questions as parents about the health of our climate system, about how they can contribute to make this planet a better and livable place. So we need to heavily invest in re-educating everybody that was born before 2005. And that includes me and probably everybody in this forum. And that's why we launched the Brundtland School for Prosperity and Governance, hoping to tackle the already trained professionals in the field that are taking decisions, investment decisions, policy decisions, community development decisions, governance decisions, and they never took a class on climate change or sustainability. So we hope to target this group, hoping that we can, through innovative educational approach, reach consensus on how we're going to tackle climate change. So to finalize, I would like to reiterate the 10 points that I would adopt as my 10-year resolution so that I can implement it from now to 2030, being the first advocate to go from climate neutrality to stability, advance predictive science and technology to address extreme weather events, ban human-induced prescribed or prescribed forest fires, relocate climate refugees due to sea level rise, fast-track RED+, decentralize climate change, have a new building code that is climate resilient, promote green chemistry, close the investment gap in terms of sustainability, and promote an educational reform so that we all become climate conscious. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emilio, for that presentation. It was absolutely beautiful. I think I've never seen a presentation that's so nice graphically. I've been seeing in the chat so many comments saying how wonderful the presentation and all the animations were. It was really incredible. We actually had one question asking what softwares you used to create the presentation, because it was really so beautiful. So but now we're going to go on to the question part of the interview. So please feel free to just post any questions for Emilio in the chat and we'll try to answer them. So just starting off with one of my own questions, actually. This might be quite a controversial question, but hopefully you can answer it. So often government officials and ministers are accused of catering to political interests instead of being proactive, and they're not proactive enough in implementing sustainable reform. So as a former government minister yourself, how would you respond to such claims? And maybe could you highlight the difficulties of putting such regulations into place from a governmental point of view?
Yeah, excellent question, Agatha. I remember back in 1998 when I started attending as government officials, the meetings of the party, the UNFCCC, and boy, you'll have nearly 200 countries, people speaking different languages. It was we could hardly agree on anything. Language barrier, cultural barriers, all kinds of difficulties, all kinds of national circumstances. You learn to navigate to that biodiversity of opinion. Just to give you an example, I had a very strong position against the OPEC countries, just to give you a very direct response. So I spent probably my first 3 or 4 years just fighting really hard against anything that the OPEC country would argue regarding climate change. But then I started realizing that they were representing their people too. I was representing my people, they were representing their people, and if you look up, probably OPEC countries have a population over probably like 500 million people. And historically, they've developed using fossil fuels. So the livelihood, the way the economic system is put in place, the livelihood is at risk. So we have to continue negotiating, hopefully find a way so that they can safely transition and without geopolitical risk, transition to a greener economy. And that's not something that's going to happen overnight. You know, overnight you cannot just shut down all 70-80% of their economy and put solar panels and pretend that they're going to be a happy country or a happy region. So those issues are extremely hard to face with, and eventually you realize that you have to have a plan, and the plan has to be a plan about a shared future, a concerted agreement, so that we orderly migrate from oil dependent subsistence to a decoupled economy that grows without the need of emitting or polluting the atmosphere. So it's a very, very difficult environment. And believe me, if you go there thinking that you're gonna kick the table and yell at people and get things done, you're gonna be probably end up speaking to yourself alone, and probably you're gonna have to leave the room in less than a few hours. So the process is very difficult. 190 plus nations speaking different languages again. So I wouldn't argue that I wouldn't rule out that there are interest from people that you hope were not in the process, but you have to be persistent and you have to manage them so that they realize that they either move out of the way or join you, because things are going to happen. We have to decarbonize our planet. We have a Paris Agreement with a clear roadmap from here to 2030. We need to agree now on what we're going to put in place by 2030 so that we go from carbon neutral, that seems to be the trend, to carbon stable by the end of the century. And that's probably a decision that you, Agatha, and all your colleagues will be making, and will be in a rocking chair, part of the work that you have done.
Thank you so much, Emilio, for that response. It's really good that you highlighted, obviously, how kind of deep-rooted these issues are in all of our economic systems and how difficult it is actually to make change. I think it's easy kind of from our position, we sometimes don't realize how complex it is in politics and everything to implement change. So just going straight on to the questions from the public, we had one question about, are the forests you are planning to manage able to be protected in the long term by the law? So as in when you're talking about the forest fire ban.
Yeah. An issue that developing countries have is that they have a lot of laws, and those laws, if you go in the field, for instance, you have what they call paper parks.
We can hear you.
You have paper parks. So basically, you have an area that is on paper is a protected area, but when you go there, there is no trees, there is no forest. So then you ask yourself, hey, where's the forest? Where's the biodiversity? Well, it was deforested in the 80s, or the 70s, in the 90s. So, and that's why we created this national park on paper, and now we need to mobilize resources to that, so that we restore those forest areas. So basically, what we have in place now is a very attractive incentive scheme, whereby if you are reforesting with natural forest species, then you get close to 100% tax cuts on your investments. We even have what we call the reforester visa. So if you come to Panama to invest in reforestation, we can grant you residence in the country, so that you can help us in addressing forest loss and climate change. Most of the forest loss in Panama took place in the 90s, because back then the government decided that people needed to take advantage of the land. So our national banks, our National Agriculture Bank, will give you a loan so that you deforest and make the land more productive via cattle ranching or agricultural development. So can you believe that a government giving you an incentive to deforest so that you make the land productive? So that policy made us lose about 2.5 million hectares from the 60s to the 90s. Then in the 90s, we put in place a new forest law. And now 2017, actually, I signed the Alliance for a Million Hectare law that basically is going to revert that. Now we're going to give you money so that do put the forest back. So, but you know, if you go with a stick, if you go with a stick and try to change the world, you're gonna probably end up with a broken stick, with your body full of bruises, because everybody is punching you. So you have to go with something, through positive reinforcement. You put in place this type of regulations that go hand in hand with the private sector, because that's the other myth that we have and it's that the private sector is bad. The private sector just wants money. And you probably see that throughout the world. Oh, that's an investor. Well, he's going to destroy the environment so he can make money. That's not the case. At least in Panama now we have in place an incentive law that would enable investors to address climate change while addressing their environmental, social, and governance commitments.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Emilio. It was you raised such important points also about actually I was reminded about when I was watching a Sea of Shadows that was also talking about how in allegedly protected areas a lot of the species were going extinct. There was a lot of illegal fishing, for example, illegal activity, and even if the laws were there, nothing was happening in practice and the laws were being broken. So obviously that's a very important part to re-give incentives and to encourage people to move from destroying nature to working with it. So I see a lot of questions coming in the chat, so I'm just going to go straight to them. I see here a question about education. So how do you think the best way would be to educate people who are born before 2005? And also, which sources would you recommend to study for these people?
Well, this is interesting because it probably not related to climate change, but just to human dynamics. In the past, you were trained to get your university degree and get a job. And then eventually you probably end up with your own company or your own endeavor, and you'll be happy ever after. Nowadays, things are changing so fast that education has gone from being a probably 0 to 25-year process to a lifelong process. So you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared to learn and study until you're done, until you're finished with whatever you want to do in your life. And that would imply several changes of careers or several expansions of careers so that you address the emerging needs in the labor market. In the past, we perceive ourselves as just a factor of productivity, an economic factor of productivity. And that's changing very rapidly because of automation. While people are so scared about robots, I would be more concerned about what's happened behind the robots, what's happening with artificial intelligence, and how are we implementing those artificial intelligence scripts so that we don't turn away humans too early, and they end up having probably 40 years out of jobs or out of something that fulfill their lives. So the way I look at it is that if you are born before 2005, you need to go back to school. It could be cooking, it could be chemistry, it could be anything, but you have to go back to school. There are so many opportunities out there. There are so many online programs out there on anything. So resources seems not to be an excuse now, because of the pandemics. Now everything is mostly online. So you have to go back to school, and that's just a fact of life. Keep yourself updated over time. And that's a discussion that, I'm sorry for extending myself, but that's a discussion that I'm having here in Panama, because my argument is that in order to produce a prosperous human being, before you needed about 25, 26 years. And as I said earlier, now it's a lifelong process. Migration is key for our development. Right now there are, for instance, groups that are against migration. My argument is, why are you going to oppose that a professional from anywhere in the world with a PhD come to Panama and work and make the country productive? It took him or her 25, 30 years to reach that level of sophistication, educational sophistication. Why should not take advantage of that? And then with that professional here in Panama, we can train 3 or more professionals, and we make the country a better place. So at the end of the day, now we need to learn until we die, basically. And I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, I completely agree with your point. Thank you so much, Emilio. That was really a really important point. I'm just seeing a lot more. There was also a comment from someone saying maybe corporations could provide some incentives, for example, for their workers to continue to study, which is, I think, again, something else you would propose. Just another question going off from that. This is quite a long question, so I'm just going to read it. From my point of view, early understanding of sustainability is fundamental. How can we teach sustainability where any aspect of the early childhood and adolescence is surrounded by marketing products, from gaming to education, that don't respect any minimum condition of sustainability? Not only the publishing industry is not taking any action, but also measuring the amount of plastics, for example, seen in international toy trade. This seems absolutely blatant.
Well, that's a very interesting point of view. Um, it's a very difficult one because marketing seems to be still king. However, with social network, if companies and marketers don't respect our planet, they're going to be facing big issues. You see a week ago how people have been canceled out of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram because of their stupidity. So I foresee that happening to companies if they believe that they can pay an ad on internet or pay an ad on TV and play the same way they used to. So if I were behind one of those big brands, I would be hiring a ton of sustainability specialists to make sure that I'm compliant with current trends in how we humans are perceiving our planet.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, I can say as a teenager myself who is on social media and who sees that, I can definitely see that as a big influence for the youth on which trends to follow and sustainability. I see another question here going back to what we were talking about the fires. Someone is asking, rural poor people use fire to readapt the soil for agriculture. So is it possible to ban these practices, and what alternative could we give to these people?
That's an excellent point because in Panama, in early 2014, 2015, we banned prescriptive fires of grassland. We were literally punched in the face by local communities because that's the way they've conducted business for so long. So then we realized that we need to have something in place for them to replace that behavior, and and it has to be positive. So that's how we came up with the that's how we came up with the law as an incentive. So basically now they are entitled a payment if they help us in restoring our forest according to science and according to law. So basically the message here is that if you're going to ban something the way I'm proposing it, you better have the resources ready for instance, Red Plus, so that those communities have resources to start restoring their livelihoods. But if you just ban and you don't put something in place, then you're just gonna get punched in the face.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that just shows the importance of kind of the research behind legislators and laws. You need to know what's in place, who's going to be affected, and how to respond. Definitely. I'm seeing we're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one last question because so many people have so many questions. So do you see opportunities for novel public-private partnerships to help manage natural resources with tools such as AI and big data?
I don't only see an opportunity. I believe it's the way to go. If we want to discuss sustainability, we need to discuss the economic aspects, the social aspects, the environmental aspects, and the governance aspects of whatever engagement we get into. What I see nowadays, in particular in developing countries, that governments are somehow seeing a failure in terms of promoting innovation. So we need the private sector to play a stronger role now. Also, we need government getting out of the way or facilitating those type of investments via PPP, public-private partnerships, so that we can get things done. Unfortunately, we lost 4 years. When we came out of Paris, 5 years actually, when we came out of Paris, I was like, boy, I'm done. It's time to implement climate change mitigation. It's time to implement climate change adaptation. Everything was agreed upon. So let's do it. And then this person from the US decided to mess up the whole agreement and pause climate change activities for 5 years. So I really hope that starting January the 20th, John Kerry, who hits the ground running and start putting in place calls for proposal for public-private partnership. For instance, the GDA, the Global Development Alliance, there's some mechanism in place in the US for a long time where $1 from the private sector is countered by $1 from the US government to implement projects in developing countries. So I hope they just put a fire hose of money into that mechanism so that the private sector can have, they come in and start over-regulating, then we're going to have problems. I think the regulations are in place. Now we need resources to get things done.